I thought I was just buying an old, quiet house on the edge of town. But the silence inside wasn't empty, it was listening. Every night, the walls seemed to breathe closer. And soon, I understood why this house had never heard human laughter. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the bed. It happened in early November, on the northern edge of a small river town in Ohio, the year I turned 50. My name is Mike, and 2 months after burying my wife I signed for a 2-story place on Alder Street, a 1950s box with asbestos shingles, rusted gutters, and a wide porch that listed like a tired shoulder. I moved in alone on a Wednesday, the kind of gray day that can't decide between rain and ash, with a rented truck, a mattress, and 3 taped boxes labeled tools, photos, and kitchen. I told myself I needed work for my hands and quiet for my head. What I got was quiet in a shape I had never met. From the first step inside the house, the air felt wrong. Not just cold, wrong. The hallway smelled of old plaster and a faint sweetness like a refrigerator left open too long. My breath ran white even though the thermostat read 68. I nudged the dial to 74, listened for the furnace, and heard it answer from below, a steady, careful hum, like a big animal pretending to sleep. I made a circuit the way electricians do, one habit I never lost. Panel in the basement, original fuse box replaced sometime in the late 90s with a breaker panel, neat enough, nothing illegal. Cloth insulated cable in a few runs, but most of it modern Romex. No hiss, no arcing, just that low uniform hum under everything, a tone you notice only when the silence around it is heavier. The boiler gauges read normal. The radiators warmed, but the rooms didn't. On the porch I watched the street. The house across the way had plastic pumpkins still out, damp with last week's rain. A tricycle lay on its side near the curb. But there were no kids, and no bird landed on the power line that cut the sky over Alder like a penciled seam. The wind moved the oak leaves into small, mean spirals. It carried sound along, the slap of a screen door down the block, a dog shaking its collar, then thinned, leaving the yard blank as paper. Back inside, the living room refused the light. I switched on a floor lamp, then another. The bulbs glowed but seemed to lose their color at the edges, as if the light was swallowed just past the shade. I hung my wife's photo on a nail someone else had left in the wall. It belonged there and didn't. I made coffee on the electric hot plate because the stove's pilot wouldn't catch. The cup steamed. My hands didn't warm. By late afternoon I was unpacking the radio from the tools box, a cheap handheld I used on jobs to monitor chatter. The house had no internet yet, no TV. I clicked the tuner, hunting for the local news, a ball game, anything. The radio gave me a ladder of static and, at the top, a bright little burst of sound, children laughing. Not a crowd, not a show, 2, maybe 3 voices, high and quick, the kind of laughter that bubbles when you try not to let it. It came through clean, then smudged into static, then came again exactly the same. 7 seconds apart, I timed it without meaning to. Laughter, smear, silence. Laughter, smear, silence. I walked with the radio from room to room. In the kitchen, the sound thinned. In the hall, it sharpened. On the basement stairs, the loop got louder. At the bottom, next to the boiler, the laughter brightened until the consonants stretched into something close to words. The way a tape played too slow will make vowels lean. I couldn't make it out. I didn't want to think it was language at all. I killed the radio and stood there with my hand on the boiler's pipe. It was warm, properly warm, and still the air in the basement felt like an unheated garage in January. The hum underfoot vibrated the soles of my boots, a clean utility tone, 60 cycles if I had to guess. I told myself what any tradesman tells himself, interference is everywhere. Baby monitors, cordless phones, cheap walkie-talkies. A neighbor's toy could bleed into a radio all day. The laughter might not even be live, it could be a store demo or a loop on some broken device. The brain makes patterns. Grief makes more. Back upstairs I ate cold beans out of a can with a plastic spoon and planned the fix. Tomorrow I'd bleed the radiators, check for air in the lines, seal the windows, add weather stripping to the back door that whistled in the wind. I'd call the gas company about the stove. I'd pick up a proper space heater. Work makes order. Order makes sleep. At dusk the streetlights came on. Their glow fell short of the porch. I stood at the window and waited for a car to pass, a pair of headlights to run along the living room wall like a hand. None came. I realized I hadn't heard a single child all day. No running, no shouting, no bargaining about 5 more minutes. The tricycle was still on its side. Night settled without surprise. The thermostat read 72. The house breathed cold through the keyholes. I set the radio on the kitchen counter and left it off. I laid the mattress on the floor of the bedroom and kept my coat on. The wind shouldered at the gutters and moved on. Sometime after midnight, I woke to silence so plain I could hear the glass windows creak inside their frames. I thought about turning on the radio to prove something to myself. What? I couldn't say. Instead I listened to the house, counted my own heartbeats, and tried a small, private thing. I smiled, just to see if my face still knew how. The cold pressed it flat. In the morning the thermostat still said 72, and my breath still smoked. The coffee tasted metallic. When I stepped onto the porch, a line of frost showed where my boot prints had stopped the night before. Across the street, the plastic pumpkins looked wet and tired and wrong in the same way the rooms felt wrong, as if the light that touched them had no warmth in it. A blue jay skirted the power line and chose a tree 2 houses down. I told myself a thing that sounded wise and was really just stubborn: houses don't mean anything. They are lumber and wire and pipes and air. Whatever you feel inside them, you bring in with you. I believed it long enough to get the truck returned and buy weather stripping from the hardware store. I believed it while I worked my hands until the rubber on the door sealed tight. That evening, when I finally turned the radio back on for the forecast, the signal climbed from static to that same brief, bright laughter, 2, maybe 3 voices, clean, then smudged, then gone. 7 seconds later, it came again. I laughed once into the empty kitchen, to show myself how a man proves a point. The sound of it fell flat and didn't travel. It started 3 days after the laughter. The house had settled into its pattern, the thermostat lying about the heat, the air steady and cold, the silence too dense to be called peace. I had weather stripped every window and sealed the back door with foam tape. It made no difference. The chill seemed to come from within the walls themselves, a slow leak of winter that ignored insulation. On Monday morning I decided to begin real repairs. The upstairs bathroom had a pipe that rattled whenever I turned on the sink. I drilled a small pilot hole near the baseboard to check the stud spacing. The bit stopped halfway through, meeting something softer than wood. I pulled it out, and the hole breathed a little puff of dust, then a whisper. I froze. The sound was low, right behind the drywall, too quiet to form words. I leaned close, pressing my ear to the plaster. The whisper sharpened, a distinct line of sound, and then it spoke. Don't laugh here. My chest went cold, a pressure like air leaving a room. I stepped back, convinced I had heard something from a vent, a pipe, anything but what it seemed. I tapped the wall with the drill handle. Hollow. A cavity space, maybe a gap behind an old repair. I told myself the vibration of the drill had carried a radio wave, a neighbor's TV. It had to be. I filled the hole with putty, wiped it smooth, and went outside for air. The street looked the same, still, quiet, the tricycle gone now but leaving a clean mark on the wet sidewalk. No one was out. A curtain twitched across the street, but I never saw a face. That afternoon I called a plumber, Tom, a local guy with 20 years in the trade. He came the next morning with a toolbox and a cigarette hanging off his lip. The first thing he said when he stepped inside was, "Cold in here. Furnace out?" I told him about the strange temperature and the hum. He went down to the basement, checked the gauges, the vents, the pipes. After 10 minutes he came back up slower than before. "You got good pressure. Gas line's clean. But that sound down there," he paused. "That's not your furnace. It's too steady. You ever had electrical wiring hum like a tuning fork?" I shook my head. He looked toward the stairs, then at me. Whatever it is, I don't want it under my boots. He packed up without another word, left his cigarette stub on the porch railing, and drove off. The truck's sound faded fast in the cold air. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, the whisper returned, not from the bathroom this time but from somewhere in the hallway, crawling along the studs like air forced through a flute. I sat up and listened. A thin voice, high-pitched, repeating the same pattern, "We can't laugh here." I turned on every light in the house. The bulbs glowed weak, gray at the edges, shadows deepening instead of shrinking. The whisper moved, slipping from one wall to another, a soft scuff of syllables that never touched the floor. I followed it down the stairs and into the basement. The air grew colder with each step. The hum from the furnace was louder now, layered, almost harmonic. I shone my flashlight across the concrete wall, looking for cracks, for anything alive. That's when the beam found it, a small wooden plaque, half buried behind old paint and dust. The surface had names scratched into it, 5 of them, in uneven handwriting: Ellen, David, Claire, Thomas, June. Beneath the names, a single year, 1964. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The wood around the carving was clean, too clean, as if it had been touched recently. I crouched and ran my fingers over the grooves. They were smooth at the edges, worn by time, but faintly warm to the touch. I told myself it was the heat from the flashlight bulb or my imagination. Beside the plaque lay a small rubber ball, discolored and cracked, the kind you'd find in an old toy box. I picked it up and dropped it almost immediately. The ball was warm. Not body temperature warm, but fresh from the sun warm, though the basement was near freezing. It rolled a few inches, stopped against the wall, and stayed perfectly still. I left the basement light on that night. The hum never stopped. Every so often, it wavered, like a breath drawn through teeth. Around 4 a.m., I heard a faint tap-tap from below, soft, rhythmic, as if something small was bouncing a ball in slow motion. In the morning, I went down again. The ball was exactly where I had left it, but the plaque looked cleaner, the dust around it brushed away. I stared at the names until they blurred. 5 children. 1964. I didn't need to know more to feel that something in this house had refused to let go of that year. I made a decision. I'd find out who owned this place before me. I'd go to the county clerk's office, check the records, get names, dates, anything. Maybe it would explain the laughter, the whispers, the way heat behaved like it had rules of its own. That evening, as the sun died behind the trees, I sat in the living room with the radio silent beside me. The air felt thick, metallic. Somewhere inside the walls, the faintest voice hummed the shape of a laugh and cut off mid-breath. I whispered into the empty room, "Who's there?" Nothing answered, at least not right away. Then, from deep in the wall behind the couch, came a single, deliberate knock. The morning after the knock, I woke to find frost on the inside of the windows. It traced the glass in thin, deliberate spirals, like handwriting. The air felt sharper than ever. I didn't bother with breakfast. Instead, I went straight to the hardware store and bought a digital recorder, something small, with a 12-hour battery. I told myself it was for proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. That evening, just after sunset, I set the recorder on the kitchen counter, hit record, and went to bed. The hum of the furnace followed me upstairs like a low tide. I left the lights on, but they did little. The glow in this house always felt filtered, as if something in the air bended away from me. I fell asleep facing the door, the radio silent beside the bed. When I woke, gray morning light spilled across the floor. The recorder was still running. I turned it off and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, thumbed through the playback, and waited for the sound of my own snoring or creaking floorboards. For the first hour, nothing. Then, faintly, I heard a sound that froze my hand midair. It was my own voice. Laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a slip of breath, a full, unguarded laugh. The kind I hadn't made in months, maybe years. It sounded too close to the microphone, as if I had been standing right next to it. I replayed the segment 5 times, trying to find a reason, a glitch, anything. But it was there, steady, undeniable. After the laughter came something else, a whisper. "He's trying to laugh again." It was soft, overlapping, almost childlike. My skin crawled. The whisper wasn't mine. It was an echo or feedback. There was rhythm in it, a shape to the words, like a voice trying to remember how to speak. I scrubbed the playback, moved back and forth between seconds, until I caught something just before the whisper, a faint metallic tap, like a toy hitting the floor. I walked through the house, listening to every creak, every hum. Nothing matched the sound. The ball in the basement flashed in my mind. I went down with the recorder still playing. The air was bitter, my breath a ghost in the beam of the flashlight. The plaque on the wall hadn't changed, but this time, when I crouched near it, the hum of the furnace faltered. Just for a moment. Then I heard the same faint tap-tap, slow and deliberate. I left the basement light on again that night. The next morning, the recorder was still on the kitchen counter, its red light blinking. The battery had almost died. I hit play and listened while making coffee. Halfway through the night's recording, I heard the furnace cycle, the wind outside, and then, under it all, a steady low voice that didn't belong to me. "You shouldn't have fixed the walls." I stopped the tape. The kitchen felt smaller, like the air itself had shrunk. The phrase looped in my head until it didn't sound like words anymore. I stepped outside to breathe, but the air out there wasn't much better. The street was quiet. The same neighbor's curtain moved slightly. Still no children, no traffic, no birds. Just the sound of wind passing through dry leaves, whispering without direction. By noon, I'd driven to the county archives. The clerk behind the counter was an older woman who recognized the address immediately. "Alder Street," she said, flipping through a cabinet. "That house gets new owners every few years." She handed me a thin folder. Inside were photocopied deeds, inspection notes, and one newspaper clipping from 1965. The headline read, "Doctor missing after local children vanish." My hands trembled as I read. The article mentioned the same street, the same number. It described a temporary facility set up in the home of a psychiatrist named Dr. Harold Weeks, who treated emotionally disturbed youth. The report said 5 children disappeared during the program. Weeks vanished a week later. No charges. No closure. I folded the paper and left. The drive back was silent except for the rattle of the truck's heater. By the time I parked, the sun was low, and the windows of the house reflected no light. Inside, it felt colder than before, though the thermostat still insisted 72. That night, I set the recorder again, this time in the basement. I spoke aloud before leaving it there, just so the tape would mark my voice. "This is Mike. Testing again. Nobody else here." I placed it near the plaque and walked upstairs. At 3 a.m., I woke without reason. No noise, no dream. Just the sense that something had shifted. I went down barefoot, the stairs creaking under me. The basement door was open, though I was sure I had closed it. The recorder's light still blinked red. The ball sat in the middle of the floor, not where I had left it. I picked it up. It was warm again. In the morning, I played the new recording. The first half was the same, the hum, a few footsteps, silence. Then came a faint echo, someone breathing close to the mic. Then, laughter. Not mine this time. 5 small voices laughing at once, distant but clear. And just before the battery died, a man's voice, low and weary. "They're learning again." I shut it off and stared at the wall. The hum of the furnace rose to a tremor that I felt in my teeth. Somewhere behind the plaster, something shifted, like fingers dragging along wood. The morning after the laughter on the tape, I didn't make coffee. My hands shook too badly to pour the water. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the radio on the counter. It hadn't made a sound since that first night, but I couldn't bring myself to move it. The house felt heavier now, as if the walls were aware of me listening. I kept thinking about the newspaper clipping, the missing children, the vanished doctor, and about the phrase on the recording, "They're learning again." By afternoon, I forced myself to keep working. The only way to stop the fear was to treat it like maintenance. If the house wanted to be cold, I'd fight it with repairs. I started pulling up the baseboard in the downstairs hallway to check for damp insulation. When the crowbar slid behind the wood, the panel came loose too easily. Behind it, wedged in the cavity, was a small book wrapped in oilcloth. It was a diary. The cover was cracked leather, the pages stiff with age. Inside, written in neat cursive, was a name, Margaret Heller, 1964. I carried it to the kitchen table and began to read. The early entries were ordinary, a young schoolteacher renting the house with hopes of tutoring local children. She mentioned the name Dr. Weeks, a man from the nearby hospital who visited to observe her lessons. The handwriting was calm, optimistic, the way teachers write when they still believe structure can save anyone. Then, halfway through the book, the tone changed. "The doctor brought 5 children today. He says they laugh too much, without reason. He wants to record how I control the behavior. They seem frightened when I ask them to be quiet." I turned the page. The next few entries grew shorter, uneven. "The sessions are strange now. The doctor says silence will cure them. He makes them stand in a circle and stare at one another until they stop smiling. I can't stand the sound when they try not to laugh, it's like choking. I heard them in the walls after he left. I know it isn't possible, but I heard them. He said if I keep hearing it, I should write instead of listening." The final entry was barely legible, the pen pressed too hard. "They don't laugh anymore. And I don't hear them now. Only the hum." The page after that was blank. I set the diary down and realized my hands were numb. The air in the kitchen had gone colder than outside. I checked the thermostat, still 72. I opened the basement door, half expecting the hum to have stopped, but it was there, steady and low, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. That night, I dreamed I was in a classroom. Desks in neat rows, chalkboard at the front, sunlight streaming through curtains. Only the light didn't warm the room, it just painted it white. 5 children stood by the wall, motionless. Their faces were smudged, features blurred like wet ink. One of them lifted a hand and pointed at me. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, from behind me, a man's voice said, "Silence helps them remember." I woke gasping. The clock read 3:12 a.m. The house was utterly still, but the smell of chalk and dust lingered in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. Somewhere below, a door creaked open, slow, deliberate, as if someone didn't want to wake me but didn't care if they did. I grabbed the flashlight and went downstairs. The basement door stood wide again. The light I'd left on the previous night was off. I aimed the flashlight down and froze. On the concrete floor, written in faint white streaks, were 5 small handprints. They led from the bottom of the stairs to the wall where the plaque hung. The ball was gone. I searched every corner, the light shaking in my hand. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, but the air was so thick it felt alive. When I turned to go upstairs, I noticed the plaque itself had changed. The names were the same, but under them, scratched into the wood, was a new line, "She helped us stop." I stumbled back, tripped on the lowest stair, and the flashlight clattered against the wall. The light flickered, caught the corner of the boiler, and in that brief flash, I saw the ball again, resting by the heater. A dark shape was pressed against it, small and crouched, but when the beam hit it fully, there was nothing there. I fled upstairs and locked the basement door. I stayed awake until dawn, the diary open beside me. Every few minutes I read the last sentence again, only the hum. By morning, the house felt almost normal. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, pale but steady. I thought about leaving then, packing the truck, selling the place for whatever it would fetch, but something stopped me. If I left, I'd never know what really happened here. I told myself I could stay one more night. Just one. I placed the diary and the recorder side by side on the kitchen counter. The hum was louder now, faintly rising and falling, like breath under the floorboards. When I pressed my palm against the wall, I could feel it vibrate. Somewhere inside, beneath the layers of plaster and paint, something was moving. I woke before sunrise, not from noise but from pressure, like the air in the house had thickened overnight. The silence was heavier than sleep. I dressed without turning on the lights. Every floorboard creaked as if warning me. I'd already decided, this would be my last day here. I'd take the diary, the recordings, hand them to someone who could explain them, and leave the house to its own ghosts. When I stepped into the kitchen, the hum was louder than ever. It filled every corner of the room, vibrating the mugs on the shelf, the plates in the sink. The thermostat still claimed 72. I unplugged it. The numbers stayed on the display. I went down to the basement one final time to collect the recorder. The air hit me like an open freezer. My breath smoked white and clung to the stairs. The light I'd left burning the night before was out again, the bulb cracked in its socket. In the dark, the hum was almost physical, a pulse beneath my feet. The recorder sat on the concrete near the plaque, its red light blinking weakly. I picked it up, clicked stop, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The wooden plaque looked freshly carved now, edges clean, letters deep. The 5 names shone as if the wood itself was sweating. Beneath them, another line had appeared, jagged and new, he stayed. A chill climbed my back, slow and deliberate. I turned to go, but something rolled across the floor behind me. The ball. It bumped gently against my shoe and stopped. For a moment, I heard children's laughter again, faint and distant, then swallowed by the hum. I kicked the ball into the shadows and ran up the stairs. In the kitchen, the hum followed me. It was no longer the sound of a machine. It was breathing. I could hear it shift, deeper, slower, almost human. The walls vibrated like a chest taking air. The diary on the table had fallen open. A new page, one that hadn't been there before, was half-filled in Margaret Heller's familiar handwriting. He listens like the others. Maybe now they can rest. The pen lay beside it. I hadn't owned a pen like that. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and stepped onto the porch. The morning was gray, windless. Across the street, the houses looked washed out, their windows blind. My truck was parked at the curb, thin ice on the windshield. As I reached for the door handle, I heard something behind me, the sound of my radio turning on inside the house. Through the open kitchen window came a burst of static, then the familiar rhythm, 7 seconds of silence, then laughter. But this time, it was only one voice. Mine. I froze. The laughter looped once, twice, each time a little slower, lower. Then a voice beneath it, almost a whisper, "We can laugh now." I stepped back onto the porch. The house's windows glowed faintly from within, though I'd left every light off. For the first time since I'd moved in, I felt warmth spill from the doorway, thick, steady heat that brushed my face like the opening of an oven. I should have driven away. I should have called someone, burned the place down, anything. But something in that warmth drew me in. It was the kind of heat a man forgets after a long winter, gentle, forgiving. I stepped through the doorway and called out. "I'm leaving. Do you hear me?" The hum deepened, folding into silence. For the first time, the air didn't bite. My shoulders relaxed without permission. The radio on the counter clicked again. The laughter returned, full now, 5 children, bright and natural, echoing through every room. The house no longer sounded empty. I reached for the recorder in my pocket and pressed play. Nothing but static. Then, faintly, a man's voice, mine, saying, "It's warm now." I smiled before realizing I hadn't meant to. My chest tightened, not with fear but something like calm. The floorboards beneath me stopped creaking. The hum vanished completely. Outside, the day brightened. The frost on the windows melted in seconds. For the first time since I'd moved in, sunlight filled the house and stayed. That evening, a mail carrier passing by noticed the front door slightly open. He called out but got no answer. The air inside the house was warm, almost too warm, and smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The kitchen radio played a soft loop of children laughing, clean and even, without static. On the table lay an old diary, closed, and a digital recorder with its red light blinking. When played later, it contained only one line, spoken by a man's steady voice. "We can laugh now." The neighbors said the house looked different after that, brighter, lighter, like someone had finally fixed whatever was broken. But when night came, no one walked too close. They said if you stood on the sidewalk long enough, just before dawn, you could hear a man's low laugh carried out through the open windows, blending with the wind, before fading away completely. The house never stood empty again.